Friedrich Nietzsche's New Philosophy of Night and Nature, Part B. With his description of the antagonism Epicurus felt for Plato, Nietzsche is showing us another instance of the Apollonian-Dionysian divergence that was then so much a part of Hellene civilization. If the philosophy of Socrates and Plato was indeed solarist in its fashion, then might there not have been a contemporary branch of Hellene philosophy that was more of the Dionysian variety? Nietzsche thinks so. The philosophy of Epicurus was this very Dionysian style of Athenian philosophy, a style or school of philosophy that one might expect to find in a society with more than one popular and powerful god. Dionysus was then the most favored god of the Epicureans, as similarly Apollo was most favored by the followers of Socrates and Plato. Here it is important to remember that both of these gods were gods of nature. The main difference between them was in how their worshippers perceived the deity within the natural world. Apollo was a more remote and somewhat terrible god who dwelt afar from mortals, which makes some sense since he was a god of the sky, whereas Dionysus was more near and dear, a god who enjoyed mixing intimately with the crowd of humanity, in nocturnal rites, festivals, and at the drama. So, it must have been due some to their imaged realms of the natural world that made them either near or far in their approach to mortals, Dionysus of the earth and Apollo of the sky. It seems to be exactly this distance of the gods in the natural world that brings about their imagined differences, remote and far versus near and intimate. And might not this have also caused a difference in perspective of their favorite theorists? Seems that it might be likely, and it could possibly explain the differing emphasis between the Socratics and the Epicureans. Socrates prayed to his god each morning as the sun arose over the mountains east of Athens. Did Epicurus do the same, though only while he enjoyed his garden and with his god nearby in the flora? A difference in proximity such as this, though difficult to imagine for some, could have had some real effect upon the theories of the philosophers. This seems to be the very points Nietzsche wishes to make when he starts his survey of popular philosophers in Chapter 1. For Nietzsche, the beginnings of first philosophy are most important, and the reason they are is because this is exactly when he believes that the delusion of denying nature gets its start. A path was not chosen that led through the garden of Epicurus, and even though it was within erotic sight of the god Dionysus. Plato and Socrates couldn't see him in the shrubbery of nature's garden, though Epicurus could. Plato, like his master, was focused on the bright beauty of the sun's light above, and the radiance of its light was thought to be like that of the first deity in the spiritual fields beyond this life. Epicurus, by contrast, must have been more down to earth in his philosophy of nature than was Socrates and Plato in their physics of nature. Even Epicurus must have seen illusion in the natural phenomena known and understood by the human senses. Where he differed in theory must have been in the valuation of it, this illusion of nature. Plato thought the sublunar sphere of material atoms and molecules to be a part of existence intrinsically bad for the more pure spirit of the psyche, which was somehow trapped within it due to incarnation in a physical body. Epicurus must not have held such an extreme view as this, since pleasure and a happy life within the natural body were thought a great good to be achieved by Epicureans. Therefore, even from what is left of Epicurean ideas, it seems plain enough to say that Epicurus somehow valued the illusion of the natural world. Okay, the followers of Socrates and Epicurus each believed in a version of natural spiritualism, and each believed in a pagan god, and each believed in a nature formed by this god that was somehow a type of divine illusion. What then were the differences between Socratic Platonism and Epicureanism? Nietzsche thinks that their theories on existence and nature differed because of the divergence between Apollonian and Dionysian ideals. The philosophies of Socrates and Epicurus were somewhat different because they believed in different gods. This was Nietzsche's reason for quoting Epicurus and his joke that made Plato into a Dionysian actor. Plato was like an actor on the stage of life who didn't know who its director was. Of course, Plato thought of Apollo as the director, but he had to invent his own myth to describe it. Who might Plato have been talking about in his myth of the cave? Chthonian Dionysians might have been the first of those he thought of when imagining his myth. Then, maybe, Epicurus was telling his own version of Plato's myth, only with the theaters of Dionysus for its setting. So maybe proximity really was important then? The question was, who was near what was really real, Dionysus or Apollo? May Epicurus then have had some reason for thinking himself a bit closer to the action? Think of what some comedian might have made of such a fissure in the highest circles of philosophy.